What's up, guys? We're gonna do a build tutorial today, and I haven't really been doing that many build tutorials in quite some time, so I might be a little bit rusty. Doing a build tutorial under the camera is really, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult. Really depends on what you're trying to do. But anyway, I've wanted to do this for a long time because I know lots of you guys out there are into squonking, and you're probably using a single coil RDA on a mechanical mod, or technically a MOSFET or unregulated mod, more or less the same, right? It doesn't have a board, and it doesn't have a screen, it doesn't have a wattage up, wattage down, so you cannot dial in the exact wattage you need. Now, the problem with that, using a single coil setup on a mechanical mod, is that you really need to figure out the exact ohms, the type of material, the type of for your coil, and also how you want to do your coil in a way that actually works for a Mech mod, right? So it's no wattage up, wattage down. You cannot, dial in to what you want. The build that you have in a Mech mod setup is going to determine your vape. The single coil RDA actually is a little bit more difficult compared to a dual coil RDA, because a dual coil RDA, you have two coils, so it's easier to get to the resistance that you want. Now, in today's build tutorial, I'm going to do one of my favorite builds, and it's a very, very simple build. So for those of you out there who cannot afford those fancy $20, $25 staggered staple fuse alien Clapton coils, and you're not really enjoying the vape that you're getting from a single coil squonk RDA on a squonk mechanical squonk mod, this will be for you. It is meant for beginners, so if you're a more advanced person and you want to pick on small little stuff and say you don't know what you're doing, that blah blah blah, you know what, I don't care, it's not for you. In today's build, I want to focus on getting the best vape experience from a single coil RDA and a mechanical mod. Therefore, I'll be looking at a few things. Number one, it must be easy to do. Anyone can do this without any special tools, without a drill, etc. And number two, it must help me to preserve the battery life, because you can get really chunky coils in there. The problem is you need to carry around 2 or 3 extra batteries if you want your setup to last the whole day. Now, with this build, it can last the whole day on a single battery, of course, unless you're chain vaping all the time. But the build that I'm about to show you, the single fully charged battery can last you the whole day. I do it all the time. And the third is that it must have good flavor. And the fourth is that it must have a very quick ramp up time. So in this build tutorial, just to clarify in terms of the wraps, because I always, sometimes I get it wrong, or sometimes, it's not what you normally say. So the wraps, it can be a bit confusing depending on which part of the coil you're looking at. If you look at the top, it could look like 5 wraps. If you look on the other side, it could look like 4 wraps, right? So I'm going to do this build, and we're going to call it a 4/5 wrap. Okay, just to be very, very clear, because if I say 5 wraps, you may be looking at this side of the coil, and this is 5 wraps, right? Now, if you look on the other side of the coil, it's actually 4 wraps. So we're going to do a 4/5 wrap. So if you look at your coil, on one side there are 4 wraps, on the other side there's 5 wraps, then that is the correct amount of wraps. I've seen other people do the same thing, the same way of describing a wrap, many other places, and I decided I'm going to be using that method as well. Instead of trying to explain where to look at the wraps and stuff, because sometimes the legs are bent differently. Sometimes it's vertical like this, or other times it bends forward. So I'm going to stick with the 4/5 wraps. That's what we're going to do in this build tutorial. Again, on one side you see 4 wraps, on the other side you see 5 wraps. Alright, let's do it, and then I'll show you how it performs. Alright guys, welcome to the build tutorial. So yeah, today I'm going to show you how to make one of my preferred builds for a mechanical single coil setup on a squonk mod, right? So let me rephrase that. A single coil RDA build to be used on a mechanical mod. a mechanical squonk mod or a MOSFET squonk mod or an unregulated squonk mod. Now, if those MOSFET or unregulated squonk mods are built pretty well, they're going to hit almost the same as a pure mechanical squonk mod anyway, right? So these are the tools you need. You need, of course, your squonk mod itself. I'm going to be removing this. We'll do a build on a different RDA. And this is the Limelight Bliss. I love this mod. Now, we will not actually be building on the mechanical slash MOSFET or unregulated mod itself, especially if it's a Mech mod, right? Because there can be so many issues that if you build on it, if you have a short circuit or hard short, and especially if you have a battery on it, if you really want to build on it, you got to remove your battery. But you know, I recommend that you just get an additional mod. This is I forgot what is it, E-Lift mod. It's not a squonk mod. I just use it for all of my builds. If you have one of those coil master kind of thingies where you know you can pulse your coil, you can check your resistance, etc., you can use that as well. I just find this a little bit easier to work with. Next, you need your RDA itself. This time I'm going to be using the Antion RDA to do the build. Screwdrivers, wire cutters, a 28 gauge wire. I like to use Nichrome or N80. This one is by Kidney Puncher. And if you cannot find Nichrome, you can also use Kanthal A1. Although the resistance would not be exactly the same, but it's good for you to start off. But the build that I like to usually I use Nichrome 80 in everything that I build on. You also need a very good battery when you're using on a Mech mod, even a Mech squonk mod. So I like to use the Sony VTC5A, and this is the only one that I can show you that I haven't actually rewrapped, right? So this is how it looks like, and it should say VTC5A right there. And I think this is one of the best batteries to be used on a mechanical squonk mod, for me at least. Now, do understand that I'm not a performance vapor. I do not build anything below 0.1 ohms. And for a single coil setup, I want to build between 0.3 to 0.2. That is the sweet spot. If I go below 0.2, it just becomes hot, because you have to understand a single coil squonk RDA are usually low profile like this. Even the Antion is pretty low profile. There's very little room inside. So if you go below below 0.2, it just becomes uncontrollably hot, spit back, etc. So I keep it between 0.3 to 0.2 ohms. Of course, you also need some wicking material. So this time I'm going to be using the Cotton Candy collection. Not my favorite wicking material. It's not that bad, but I really have to finish this up because I usually use Kogendo. Last but not least, you need a coiling jig. So you can get, one of those Coil Master simple ones. You get a 3mm coiling jig. I prefer to use this. I got this from some pre-made coil package by Geekay, and I just prefer to use this. It is exactly 3.0mm in diameter. So the first thing that you want to do is cut off some of that 28 gauge Nichrome wire, and you don't need that much actually right now. If you know how to straighten the wire, then by all means, you can use your drill and straighten the wire. It just makes it much easier to work with. But I'm going to assume that you don't know how to straighten the wire. So we're going to cut 3 equal lengths, and we're going to do a 3-core bill with the round wire, 28 gauge round wire. In order to get the resistance lower, we are going to stack up a few wires, right? So if you take a 28 gauge wire, whatever resistance it is, if you put 2 of it, it's going to halve the resistance, and if you put 3, you will have the resistance divided by 3. It's really that simple. The other thing is, you have to also look at your RDA. So this is the Antion RDA, for example. I think there's enough room in there, so I can use the 3.0mm coil bill, and I will not be choking off the airflow. If you have a different squonk RDA that is a little bit more narrow inside, or the airflow is not as wide open as the Antion, you may want to consider using a 2.5mm inner diameter. So you got to get your 2.5mm coiling jig, something like this, and the other steps are basically the same, but your resistance will be slightly less. So You got 3 strands of 28 gauge wire right here, and what you can do is you can use some tape to just tape one end of it if you find this hard to work with. Now I don't really find it hard to work with. Of course, if the wire is more straightened out, it will be slightly easier. But the way I do it is very simple. I don't really need a coiling jig or coiling, you know, the coil master coiling thing that you can use to spin around. Yeah, it looks like this, right? This thing, we don't need that because it's hard to build on that if you are, you know, using 3 wires at one go. So what I'm going to do is basically I'm going to just wrap it like this. I'm going to start from the center, right? And I'm just going to be using my fingers. I find that to be the most effective, especially if the wire is not straightened out yet. Let me get a close-up on that. Right, so I'm going to start from the middle like this. Press it in. Just use my fingers. Tighten it. We want the center to be tightened and just straighten out everything. Alright, and now I'm going to do my wraps. I'm going to wrap one on this side. And you notice I leave a little bit of space because that makes it easier for you to calculate the amount of wraps. Again, grab and pull. Just gonna put it in. Hold this. Bend this part down. Bend the other part down as well. Okay. Push everything to the center. And we're going to tighten this down. Just like that. Alright, so you got to make sure that all 3 wires are pretty secure in there. Move it about a bit. And then it's time to cut the wires. Once again, 28 gauge wire, very easy to work with. Now if I did this with 26 gauge wire, I would probably be using 2 26 gauge wires, not 3. 28 gauge wire is much more softer, malleable. And now we're just going to do some tidy up. So I'm just going to make sure, depending on the RDA that you're using, make sure that the wires don't actually touch the top cap. If it's a stainless steel top cap, because you're going to have shorts, right? So that's why it's important to never do the build on the actual Mech mod itself. So the anti-on, and I'm going to position the coil. Push all these things closer, closer, closer. Right, there we go. A 0.26 ohms coil, and we're just going to pulse it a little bit. So this lead right here is not very secure, and I find this an issue sometimes on the anti-on. The outer parts of it, the clamp, it doesn't really clamp down that well, so I'm going to adjust that. Now the anti-on is still not trapping this lead. As you can see, it just comes out, so that's no good. I should have probably used a different RDA. I should have anticipated this problem in the anti-on. So in the anti-on, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip the clamps. I find that the clamps just gets a bit out of shape after some use, so it's better to just flip it. And that way it's going to clamp down all 3 wires much better. Again, some RDAs are so much easier to do. And if I could have started this video all over again, it's actually much easier if I've just chosen a different RDA that has a better, more predictable clamp or more predictable screw. And there you go. Alright, so now all the wires are secure in there. So it's, whenever you make adjustments, you want to make sure that you have your coiling rod inside, because you don't want the wires to get, you know, apart. You just want all 3 wires to be in there. And if you actually make your adjustments without putting the coiling rod in, it can get a little bit messy, right? Much better. some organic cotton. I like to tear off the ends of it a little bit just to make it easier to put the cotton in. So you want to make sure your cotton is in there tight, just like this. Not too tight, so if you're pulling and the coil actually moves, that is a bit too tight, right? You can just put your finger here and just pull it through. Back and forth like that. Nice. Now with the scissors, cut, fluff up the cotton a little bit, and to remove any loose parts of the cotton. This will help a lot to improve the capillary action, which means how fast your juice can get to the middle of the coil. Alright, so check the ohms level, resistance, make sure that it's stable, everything is just nice. You can test fire in your test fire mode, but basically if your resistance is stable, you can already move it to your actual Mech mode. Now I still recommend that you do not put any battery inside if you're moving it until you're really sure, right? So now I'm just going to tuck the cotton in. Especially with Mech mods like this, the reason I remove the battery because the firing switch is right here. And believe it or not, I have actually done this and accidentally hit the firing switch. It's very soft, so you just need to fire a little bit, just like this, and it already fires. So that's why when doing on this mod, I usually remove the batteries first. Stuck the cotton in. So I don't usually fumble around with 3 20 gauge wires I showed you in this video. This is just an example to show you how you can do it if all you have is a 28 gauge wire and you don't know how to straighten the wire, etc, to get a good vape from a single coil build on Squonk RDA on a Mech mod. But what I usually do nowadays is I just make my own coils. So inside this coil is the same thing what you see here, right? It's got a triple core 28 gauge Nichrome inside there, but it's been wrapped to make it a fused clapton coil, and the wrap is also 38 gauge, right? So inside it's 28 gauge times 3, just like this, but it's been wrapped with 38 gauge wire, and that makes it a whole lot easier to work with. In terms of the change in resistance, it's not that much because it's a very thin wrap, 38 gauge. It doesn't really affect the resistance that much at all. Alright, now I'm going to put in my batteries. Saturate. So with the wicking as well, you want to make sure that you use your cotton to fill up the DAC if you want really strong intense flavor, right? And leave enough cotton in there to fill up the DAC and make sure that the airflow stays where you want it to stay, which is just on the coil itself, right? So the center part of the coil is going to get heated up first, usually most of the time. So you want as much airflow focused to the center of the coil, and every other part, like this part right here, we don't want to leave any room here. You just want to fill it up. There you go. Now let's test it out. So see what I mean? Instant ramp up, just like that. If you have a heavy clapton coil in here, you can actually see that once you press the fire button, nothing actually happens for about half a second, quarter of a second, sometimes even 1 second if you have the wrong bill in here. And what that does is it just drains your battery pretty fast just to ramp up the coils to get it to the temperature that is required to actually, to produce vapor. So something like this, very quick ramp up time. Again, it's not too aggressive. Because it's a single coil RDA, and all I want to do here is, I want to have a good vape. I'm not interested in showing off, blowing huge clouds, and I want my battery to last, if possible, the entire day. Put the top cap back on. So this battery is not exactly fully charged. And when it's fully charged is when you're going to get the maximum amount of volts. So that may be a little bit too hot or too instant for you, but very quickly you get into the sweet spot, at least for me, right? This build is about how I like to vape. So let's check it out. Here you go, guys. The perfect single coil Mech mechanical squonk build for me. There are other builds as well. I will share in a separate build tutorial if I have the time. And the beauty of this is that you can do it very simply without most advanced tools, even without the common tools, the coil master, winding, jiggy thingy. You can do it just with your fingers, right? All you have to do is to make sure that you group the 3 wires and leave a space between the group of 3 wires so that when you look at your wraps, you can tell for sure how many wraps you have, right? There should be 4 wraps on the bottom side and what appears to be 5 wraps on the top side. And the other thing is leave your coiling jig in at every time. So this coil right here, if I remove the coiling jig and just expect to hold it with my fingers, and you can very quickly see it just kind of gets messed up. And if you want to adjust your coil without the coiling rod, it's just going to fuck itself over. With the coiling jig in place until you have everything tightened, etc., it should be pretty easy to do. And it works on a lot of single coil squonk RDAs. I use it in mostly every restricted airflow single coil slammed RDA that I have. For other types of RDAs, the 24mm or 23mm like the B2K or 24mm like the Flav, this may be a little bit subdued, right? You need something a little bit more different. But for most 22mm slammed RDAs, I think this build should work very well, and it should give you a good vape that you can enjoy the whole day without having to bring around extra batteries. Of course, by the time you get home, the battery will need charging and the vape level is already, very, very low. But the point is that you can actually survive the entire day with this build and you don't have to be carrying around too many extra batteries. Okie dokie, no more smoky.